Hi again, and welcome to another installment of the Love and Literature Reviews. Today we're going to talk about Hatchet, written by Gary Paulsen. If you went to middle school, you've probably read this book, but it was on the list, so we're going to review it today. I'm going to start with a few of my favorite quotes from the book. First was on page 43. I like this because it kind of shows Brian's reaction to his situation, how he has to just break things down to the very basics to be able to cope with what's going on. My name is Brian Robinson, and I'm 13 years old, and I'm alone in the North Woods of Canada. So this is right after his plane crashes, and he's just trying to not have like a complete and total freak out as he realizes, okay, I'm alone, and no one knows where I am because I flew for an hour in the opposite direction of our flight plan, and I'm stranded. So he has to just, in his 13-year-old little mind, go, I'm alone, and I'm in North Canada, and that's all I know. And he has to just cope from there. There's a few more instances where he does that. Like at one point he says, I'm going to find food and I'm going to look for berries in the bushes. Just like, I have to be so basic because I don't know what else to do or I'm going to freak out. Another quote that I like is on page 77. He did not know how long it took, but later he looked back on this time of crying in the corner of the dark cave and thought of it as when he learned the most important rule of survival, which was that feeling sorry for yourself didn't work. So I like this because it resonates with the theme of positivity that goes on throughout the entire book, because his situation is really dire throughout the most of the book, and he is able to realize really early on, I think like within 4 days of being stranded, that I can't pity myself or I'm going to die. Like I have to actively be working against my situation or I'm going to die. So crying about it only does me so much good in that I've cried. Nothing else has been done. I don't have food, I don't have shelter, I don't have fire. So instead of crying about not having fire, I need to find out how to find fire. A couple of things that I liked quote-wise. Paulsen has a very distinct writing style. He kind of writes like it's Brian's train of thought throughout the majority of the book. So there's these really long run-on sentences with like 10 ands where he says, and I'm running, and then I lay down and I sit by the tree, and then I'm making a fire, and then I'm getting in the lake, and then I'm getting out of the lake, and just this stream of thought because he's so frantic and having such a hard time coping to his reality. And then there's other times where he has really short sentences where like, it didn't work. Nope. I'm alone. I'm stranded. So you kind of get to see a little bit more of Brian's thought process as he's sitting trying to survive in the woods, because Paulsen writes it that way. I do think at times it's a little bit hard to follow because it is so choppy and so, like you have these really long run-ons and then you have these little tiny fragments, not really fragment sentences, but very small sentences that are just really short spurts. So you kind of have to really be paying attention the whole time to be able to hit the rhythm that he's trying to create, but once you do, it really is effective in helping you realize Brian's thought process. So those are some of my favorite quotes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the character and the plot. We really only have one main character because there's not very many people in this book because he's stranded. And it's Brian Robinson. He's 13 years old, and at the beginning of the book he is flying to northern Canada on like a little single passenger plane with just him and the pilot to go visit his dad because his parents have just divorced. And really early on in the book, even when he's still in the plane, we realize that he's having such a hard time with this divorce. He knows a little bit more about what went on with it than his dad does even. He caught his mom kind of in a compromising situation, and he calls it the secret throughout the whole book, and it just eats at him, and you can tell. And as they're flying in this plane, the pilot has a heart attack and dies. So Brian ends up taking over the controls and flies the plane for a little while and is just frantically trying to figure out how he's going to not crash this plane. So he flies 2 or 3 hours off course and lands the plane in a lake and is able to get out and get on the little shore of the lake, and he's stranded. He's in the middle of the northern Canadian woods by himself, stranded. And the book just really takes off from there. That's kind of the plot, is that he is this little 13-year-old boy alone in the woods trying to survive. And a lot of people call this a coming-of-age story, and I guess in a sense it is. I kind of struggle with the coming-of-age story title for anything because it's very situational. Like, your coming-of-age story is not going to be mine. So yeah, I guess it is in the fact that he survives the woods and learns a little bit about himself, but it's kind of an interesting way to come of age. And he deals with all of his personal turmoil as he goes through the physical struggles every single day of where do I find water, how do I make fire, where do I find food, how do I survive the elements, how can I avoid all of the crazy animals that he runs into while he's living in the woods. And there's, I mean, it's kind of intense. It's kind of heavy. It's a very short book. There's only like 180 pages, but you go through a lot of emotions and a lot of events within those 180 pages as he learns who he is and why life is the way that it is. It's kind of interesting. You kind of almost don't believe the struggles that he goes through. He gets sick off some berries. Okay, I can believe that. He runs into a bear. Sure, he runs into a bear. Gets attacked by a moose. He sees a wolf. He gets attacked by a porcupine. He gets attacked by a skunk. There's a tornado. Like, by the time you get to the tornado, you're just like, okay, Paulsen, you're kind of pushing it a little bit. Like, really, there's a tornado in northern Canada that tears right through his camp on top of the moose attack that happens the same day, really. But for who I think this book is written for, I'm sure that's exactly what needed to happen to keep the attention span of who he wrote this book for. But for me, I kind of was just kind of entirely the whole time going, another one? Like, he's getting attacked again? Like, didn't that just happen? Because it did just happen. Within the 180 pages, there's like 7 attacks from animals, and he gets sick a million times. And but it's a very charged plot. I mean, you kind of have to have a lot of events because there's no interaction with anyone because he's by himself. So things have to happen for you to continue moving on in the book. So Gary Paulsen does a great job with that. And that's kind of generally what happens in the book. So, like we always do, we end it with should you read before you die, and Hatchet is a big fat no for the 18 to 30-year-old woman. You don't need to read this book. There's no reason. But if you have a 12-year-old son, yeah, definitely have him read it, even up to maybe 15. Like I said before in the plot, there are 18,000 animal attacks, and he learns how to make fire with a hatchet, and he dives into the lake to get the survival kit from the plane, and there's a plane crash, and it's such a boy book. It's so written for a 12-year-old boy, which is exactly what Gary Paulsen was shooting for, so he totally nailed it. It's a great book for a 12-year-old boy, and there's only 180 pages in it, but because it's not written for me, it took me forever to get through it because I was kind of like, okay, I cannot follow this train of thought. I cannot follow this writing. It is so entirely the style, the context, the thought process, the attacks, the plane crash, everything that happens in this book is for like an adolescent boy. So, should you read it before you die? No. Should you buy it for your son who's in middle school? Yeah, probably. So, I mean, it's well written, don't get me wrong. It's a Newbery Honor winner. He's got 2 or 3 other Newbery Honor winners. Great author, great book. But no, you can skip this one. You don't have to read this book. Okay, so that is all I have for Hatchet. Next week, we're actually going to veer from the list because I just can't handle not doing a review on Ghost Set of Watchmen that was just released by Harper Lee, so we're going to talk about that next week. And thanks again for watching. I so appreciate it. Into it, but there's okay, not this strip, on all of the crazy animals that he runs into. His pilot has a heart attack. It's actually kind of a funny scene. His pilot starts like leaking gas, like he's kind of, I'm saying this weird, he's like leaking, he's farting. But I don't know how to say that. I don't care that this is here.